Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is B.K. Greenwood, author of the historical fiction series The Last Roman. The first two novels, Exile and Abyss, are available now, and Greenwood will be completing the trilogy in the spring with the release of the final book, Absolution. B.K., welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure. Well, if someone hasn't yet heard about your historical series, The Last Roman, how would you describe the series?
I think the best way to describe it is it's a hybrid of a historical fiction and modern thriller. If we were going to apply it to movies that people might be familiar with, it would be maybe The Highlander and Gladiator meets John Wick or Jason Bourne. So a little bit of historical fiction mixed in with a modern plot line that follows the characters through the series.
And do you remember the original idea or impetus that led you to write the Last Roman series?
I actually don't. I started it in the late 90s, so 20 plus years ago, and I don't remember the actual genesis of it. I do know that I was heavily influenced by, like I mentioned, the movie Highlander.
Sure.
I always loved history, so I wanted to write something with history. And for me, to be able to do a series where I have this modern, action going on, where I do these flashbacks in historical periods, and I can jump to any period I'd like to, since I have these immortal characters that live for 2,000 years. And that just really appealed to me as a lover of history.
And what was your writing journey before you started these novels, as you said, in the late 90s, or were these the first novels you had written?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's the first thing I did. A lot of people journal or do short stories or wrote all the way through like high school. I never did any of that. I read voraciously. I love to read everything I could, science fiction, fantasy, history. But my first time to sit down and actually write was this first novel. It's the first thing I ever tried writing. Like I said, it took 20 years to get it out the door, kind of like kids, but eventually you got to push them out the door and let them go out on their own. And that's what I did last May.
Sure. And what was your writing process when you were working on The Last Roman? I know as you have said that you started in the late 90s, but did you plot the entire trilogy before writing or publishing the first book?
No, I'm more of I think I know that I knew the whole arc where I wanted to go with the story over the 3 books. But as far as plotting out each individual chapter is where they would go, I'm not a plotter. I'm more what they refer to as a pantser, right? I kind of know where the characters want to go, but I if they want to go somewhere else along the way, they kind of take me on the journey with them. So book 1, I had finished probably about the 5-year mark, and I just kept re-editing and re-editing and tweaking, and I make a little bit different ending and so forth. But I knew where I wanted book 2 to go. And then book 3, I knew the general idea of how I wanted to finish it, but I didn't really get it locked down till the last month or two where I wanted it to end.
And did you digitally publish these novels?
Yeah, so they're both digital. Yeah, they're digitally self-published through KDP, but they're also available at like Barnes and Nobles. I went through Ingram Spark, so libraries can order them, and you can order them, the physical copies, through any of those outlets. Plus, you can order it from my website too. I have them available there, and I sign them when I send them out, so it's kind of a little bit extra. Sure.
And what has that indie publishing experience been like for you, and how have the books been doing in terms of readers?
They're pretty good. I think I enjoy the self-publishing route because after 20 years of me kind of not getting this moving, I wanted to get it out there pretty quickly. And you went the traditional route, it might be a year for an agent if you were lucky to get one, and then another year for getting into the publishing house. And then it would probably be 2 years between books, 1 to 2 years between books. So we're probably talking 6 years for the series, and I'm going to end up doing it in less than 12 months. And I wanted to do that because I want to get an established backlog of books out there that people can read and get to know me as an author, so I can work on other things. But the journey's been great. I've really enjoyed it. I like controlling the marketing and advertising aspect of it. It's been doing fairly well. I think they say most indie authors don't hit the 1,000 book mark. It's really tough to get there. And book 1 just is coming up on 4,500 units sold, so it's doing pretty well.
That's great. So have you thought about your writing plans after you finish the 3rd book in the Last Roman series?
Yeah, I think what I'm going to do is work on some prequels. I'm going to pick a period of time instead of doing just a chapter flashback. I'm going to do a whole book on one period of time. So it might be one of the Crusades. I'm really kind of honing in on maybe the third Crusade, or there's a period right around like the Golden Horde with Genghis Khan. So I might do a whole book on just one period with the characters that I've already established. And then I'm starting to dabble into a science fiction series that I'm thinking about doing. So that might be and I might work on those at the same time, because sometimes it's nice to be able to bounce between two different whips that you have going on.
Sure. And given your experience of writing these novels, as you said, starting in the late 90s and then taking your time and doing all the re-editing and then pursuing the indie publishing route and, selling 4,500 books. I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at. What writing advice would you offer for those who are working on their own stories and novels?
I think the best advice I could give, and it's actually going to sound counterintuitive, is don't always just take advice you get like at 100%, right? Because you'll see gurus that will say, hey, you have to write every single day if you want to be a writer, or you have to read all the time if you're going to be a writer, or don't edit as you write. Whatever works for you should be what you want to do. Whatever motivates you, whatever keeps your creative juices flowing should be what you do. If someone says, hey, you got to do 5,000 words a day or else you're not a writer, then you could just put that pressure on yourself and just drive yourself right out of the field. So to me, sometimes I go 3 or 4 days without writing, and then I'll have a real productive couple days.
Sure.
And so to me, I think it's an art. There are no real rules to art when it comes to making it. There might be rules that come and say, hey, you have to put words in a certain order or nobody's going to understand it, right? But when it comes to the process of it, don't be bound by what people tell you, is my opinion.
That's good. Good advice. So what novels have you read recently that you enjoyed?
Well, I've noticed that the last year since I've gone the self-publishing route, I tend to only purchase and kind of follow other self-published authors. Mm-hmm. I think it's really, if I'm going to ask people to take a chance on me, I like to take a chance on other authors. So recently I read a book by a veteran called Jeff Hine. It's called Cimbri Appear, and it's basically based in like 150 BC. It's a historical novel about a group of barbarians that fought the Roman Empire over about a 50-year period of time and defeated them several times. So this is book 1 in that series, and I really enjoyed that.
That's great. Well, where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you and the Last Roman series?
It's super easy. Just go to bkgreenwood.com, and there's you can learn more about me as an author. There's links to all my books and blurbs on all the books. There's reviews, and you can learn the different options for ordering the books. Like I said, you can order them directly from me. They're actually available on audio now through Audible. Book 1 has been released, and book 2 comes out in about 2 weeks. So yeah, you can go there and send me any questions. Sign up for the newsletter if you want to find out about the upcoming release of book 3. And I also send out some free short stories every now and then that are associated with the story, kind of built in the universe of The Last Roman.
That's great. Well, again, we've been speaking with B.K. Greenwood, author of the historical fiction series The Last Roman. The first 2 novels, Exile and Abyss, are available now. And Greenwood will be completing the trilogy later this spring with the release of the final book, Absolution. And BK, thanks for doing this interview.
No problem. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Now, stay tuned for a brief excerpt from the novel The Last Roman, Exile by B.K. Greenwood, narrated by Peter Noble. Available wherever audiobooks are sold.
It is easier to find men who will volunteer to die than to find those who are willing to endure pain with patience. Julius Caesar. The Roman officer squinted at the setting sun, then looked over at a cluster of priests. The tallest glared at him down a long, crooked nose. The officer shook his head and turned to the centurion sitting next to him, a grizzled veteran who spat on the ground and shrugged. Frustrated, the officer glanced back at the prisoners hanging on the crosses. The 2 thieves were awake but silent, A third, the so-called prophet, appeared to be unconscious. "Shit," Marcus said beneath his breath as he walked to the edge of the rocky knoll. The centurion followed close behind, his shadow stretching down the barren hillside. "Marcus, only you could fuck up a crucifixion." "Shut up, Gaius." Marcus glanced back at the priests, then to the centurion. "What do you think?" "Me? I think we should kill them all. Even the priests, but that's probably why I'm not an officer." "Yeah, probably." Marcus nodded. "Here's how I see it. If you ignore their request, and if they had an agreement with Pilate, you know how that will go down. And if they are lying, we can handle that later, our way." "You're right, but I still don't like it." "What's there to like?" The centurion's scarred face softened. "Once we like this part of the job, well, let's just say things couldn't get much worse." "I get it." Marcus cast his gaze toward the prisoners, where it lingered for a moment before he said, "All right, let's get on with it." Marcus crossed the knoll, stopping before the high priest. "I will honor your request, but a Roman soldier will carry it out." The priest raised his chin. "That is acceptable." Marcus glared at him. This priest didn't act like a conquered man, which was the real problem with these Jews. They didn't know when they were beaten. Turning to the centurion, Marcus motioned to a nearby plank. "That should do." Gaius pointed to a soldier who picked up the piece of wood and started toward the closest thief. The prisoner glanced from the soldier to the board, unsure of his intentions, which soon became apparent as the legionnaire planted both feet and swung the board forward, shattering the prisoner's legs with a single blow. The man slumped forward, the weight of his body crushing his lungs and squeezing the life from his limp form. Without hesitation, the soldier moved on to the other thief, who begged to be spared. The pleas intensified to screams as the soldier struck his blow. This time, the force was enough to break the board as well. As the prisoner slowly suffocated, the soldier looked down at the splintered plank, then at Marcus. The latter glanced around the hillock, but there were no other boards. His eyes fell upon a nearby soldier and the weapon he held. "Longinus, your spear." The young man handed him the lance. Marcus balanced the hefty weapon and decided that it would suffice. The priest rushed forward, his entourage scrambling to keep pace. 2 soldiers stepped in front of him, their spears crossed to block his advance. "You must break his legs," demanded the priest. Marcus spun around, scowling. "What did you say?" The priest licked his lips and pressed his point. "I said you must break his legs. That was the agreement with Pilate." "Are you giving me an order?" Marcus glared at the priest. "Well, no. I mean, yes." Marcus closed the gap between them, the spear clenched in his fist. The 2 soldiers stepped aside as the priest tried to stand his ground. He was no match for the angry Roman, and he shuffled back a few steps, bumping into his companions.